This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
There's an ancient quote from an unknown author that goes something like this. There is one thing mightier than kings and armies. The power of an idea when its time has come to move. There's that pesky reference to timing again. I'm Phil McKinney, and you're listening to Killer Innovations. Our guest today is someone who I've known for some time, and someone who I consider kind of a co-collaborator or maybe even a co-conspirator on some crazy ideas. I'd like to welcome Bill Geiser to the show. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Phil, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So, Bill, give us the 60-second radio commercial on you. So when you meet somebody new at a dinner party, how do you introduce yourself?
So, I have been a serial entrepreneur and a intrapreneur, meaning I've done lots of startups in the traditional sense, but I've also got a fair amount of experience doing startups inside large corporate environments, which is, jumping ahead, where you and I first met. I've been instrumental in bringing 4 companies to life, 2 of which got acquired by publicly traded companies. And then I spent 8 years at Fossil, essentially trying to bring wearable computing to life inside one of the world's largest watch companies. And I'd say as a theme of my career, I've spent the last 20 years really exploring and developing wearables targeting both fitness and lifestyle markets.
So you've gone through the whole process of starting companies, growing them up. Walk us through your early career, because where you ended up or where you're at currently in your career has no correlation to the industries you were in when you first started out.
In my mind, there is a connection, but maybe that's what makes me a little bit different is when I came out of college, I started selling, and I was fortunate to get into what we now look at as the computer networking field. And along that route, I saw an opportunity to create a small company that specialized in selling network accessories, protocol analyzers, bridges, routers, gateways. So it was a value-added reseller, with quite a bit of professional service thrown on top of it. And one thing led to another, and I ended up selling that company to 2 publicly traded companies. One was more of a physical wiring business, and the other had more to do with local area networking, connectivity, and troubleshooting. Once I sold those companies, I decided to take a little time off, and I jumped back in the pool. I had been a college swimmer, actually a lifelong competitive swimmer. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to just jump back in the pool. I'll get in shape. And every day as I was walking into this pool, I saw people in the gym on Stairmasters and bike machines, and all that gear had blinking lights telling people how far, how fast, how many. And I started thinking about that. And I thought, that would be a really novel tool for swimming. Elite swimmers will put in maybe 3,000 to 4,000 meters per year in training. If you think about it, that's over 60,000 lengths of a 50-meter pool. And one of the real challenges, and it's what makes the great swimmers unique and separates them from all the rest, is they're able to hold their concentration throughout this grueling type of training. And so I created a watch that tracked important metrics that helped a swimmer focus on what made them efficient in the water. And that was kind of where I learned the wrist was a really important strategic place on our body. It was an ideal location for glanceable information. And so that's what set me off on this, call it a 20-year journey of building watches that tell more than time.
So what happened with that watch then? Did somebody pick that up and run with it?
Well, I ended up doing a global distribution deal with Speedo, and I would call it a moderate success, not a great success, but it was moderately rewarding financially and incredibly rewarding in terms of really understanding some of the challenges of building a wrist-mounted display that was cloaked in what looked like a cool-looking watch. And
so what year was this? What year were you doing this?
I started the development on it in 95, and I soft launched the product at the World Triathlon Championships in Hawaii in October of 1997. And that was kind of funny because, you have to be an official sponsor, and I got there the week ahead, and I used to wear this product, and I'd swim with, all the world's best professional triathletes. And I was a great swimmer, and I was young enough then that I could hold my own in the water against these guys. And I'd always jump out and say, God, I just set the record for the swim thing. And they'd say, oh, you didn't set any record. And I'd say, well, come here, take a look at this. And it was kind of a stealth-like campaign, which proved very effective. The lady that won the triathlon that year was a triathlete named Heather Furr, and she's on the cover of the Triathlete magazine, which was the big publication, wearing my little dinky watch, which was a big coup for me and the company. And then I went to the World Swim Championships in Perth, Australia, and that's where I closed the deal with Speedo. And they took it worldwide under the Speedo brand. So it was. Well,
let me tell you, in 1995, you were way out there, way ahead of anybody else.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. It was not a. If you think about this, this was really sort of the early days of what we now call quantified self. It's like a Fitbit, except for swimmers.
Hey, Bill, let's wrap this. We're going to go to the commercial break here in just a second, but I want to come back and talk now about really how did you go from that then to trying to convince a company that is the size and scale of Fossil to take on kind of a technology bent that you normally don't think of as being in the watch business, but being way out ahead of what today we all tend to just accept as being the normal thing. So just stay right there. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back. I'll be posting links to everything we talk about in the show notes at killerinnovations.com. Go check it out. I'm Phil McKinney, and you're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
When it comes to innovation timing, don't get hung up on looking backwards. Walt Disney said it best. Times and conditions change so rapidly that we must keep our aim constantly focused on the future. I'm Phil McKinney, and you're listening to Killer Innovations. Our guest today is Bill Geiser. Bill's a longtime friend of mine. Like I said in the first segment, we were either collaborators or co-conspirators. I think some of our bosses would have classified us as being co-conspirators in trying to change the technology landscape. Bill, you were so early, when you go back to 1995, on the work that you were doing and the product that ultimately you partnered with Speedo on. But how did you end up then at Fossil, which is where I met you? But how did you end up at Fossil?
Well, something you said before really resonated with me, which is rarely do you see companies take an idea that might be a little too early for the market, put it on the shelf, and wait until the market matures, and then they bring it back and reintroduce it. But that's exactly what happened with my, call it, obsession with watches telling more than time. Was the swim watch project was interesting. It was fun. I don't know if it was a business. I'll call it more of a hobby, but I really believed it had a lot of potential at some point in the future, and I wasn't really sure what was going to be the driver of that. And it was in 2004. I saw people, mostly men, wearing Bluetooth headsets. And in fact, there was a massive growth in the use of Bluetooth headsets in 2004. I think there were well over 100 million of them sold that year, up from maybe 16 million the year before. And inevitably, what I saw was the way people used them was when they got an incoming call, they would reach into their pocket, pull their phone out to see who was calling, and then they would accept the call. And I thought, well, it doesn't sound like that's a lot of work to do, but if you're getting a lot of calls every day, reaching into your pocket every time an incoming call comes in could get a little, it's just unnecessary. And since these were Bluetooth-attached devices, I thought, this is a really great use case for a watch. It's a simple little glanceable display about, incoming calls or text messages and things like that. So I approached the management team of Fossil, who I had met during the swim watch days. That's where I first got acquainted with them, but they didn't have any sport brands at the time, so they passed on a collaboration with me. So I approached them again with this idea about tying watches and mobile phones together. And, as you might suspect, most of the feedback I got ranged from, "Are you crazy?" to "You are nuts." But there were a couple of people inside who were sort of intrigued with the idea, and they brought me on board. Little did I know at the time that they were underway in projects with Microsoft and Palm to build what I'll call were really early smartwatches. And I ended up getting brought on board to lead the division that developed and commercialized those products.
Well, I think those of us who've been in the tech world for a little bit of time can't forget the picture of Bill Gates and the Spot Watch. Holding it up at the press conference, and and then even the early Palm days, the early Palm Watch. That's almost it's almost a poster child example of great idea, but the market timing was a big challenge. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would very much agree that market timing was a fundamental issue in both products, but what's interesting is the Palm Watch was a PDA on the wrist. And the problem there was the PDA was in the process of going extinct at the time. People more and more were using the mobile phone in their handbag or their pocket to use as a scheduling, as a calendar item and all the PDA kind of functions. The Microsoft Spot Watch was the Apple Watch 10 years ahead of its time. So two different timing-related issues, but ultimately you're either way too early or you're way too late in the market. And either one, the results are normally the same. It's a disaster.
Well, and I'm trying to replay back here how you and I met. I guess it was back in 2005. My team had put out we were on a innovation and design roadshow. We'd put out some videos on some early concept devices, and we had put out this concept of a wrist device that actually replaced the mobile phone completely onto the wrist, so you wouldn't even have the phone in your pocket, kind of a concept. And you saw that and reached out to me back then in 2005, and that's how you and I got connected. I guess like crazies, kind of lashing our boats together a little bit.
Yeah, I was ecstatic when I saw the articles about you talking about this. I felt like the Richard Dreyfuss character in Close Encounters, where there's yet another person making a strange volcano, and but I really believed that at the really early stages of these kinds of products and categories or paradigms, if you want to call it, it really does help to network with people and get your ideas out there. And so I'm a big believer in that. That's something I believe in very, very strongly. The last thing I would ever do is try to take an idea and put it into some sort of stealth mode, because I think you really lose the opportunity to collaborate with lots of smart people and build relationships that can take you to many different places for a long period of time, as is what you and I have done. So,
yeah, I think you bring up a good point, because in Silicon Valley, the common request is hey, I got this great idea, but I'm not going to tell it to you unless you sign a non-disclosure agreement. The general approach, with venture capitalists, they will not sign. I typically will not sign, and I don't ask anybody to sign. I mean, when we started showing off some of that early work back in 2005, my biggest battle was not senior management. My biggest battle was the attorneys, and particularly the intellectual property attorneys, making the big claim that we're giving stuff away, when in reality, the fact that we put it out there, you saw it, reached out, and then 5 years later, we come back together to basically unveil what you and the Fossil team had done around the concept of the idea that turned into MetaWatch. But that would have never have happened if we played the non-disclosure game, because our attorneys would still be talking about what's in that NDA.
Yeah. The other thing, too, is people are worried about competition. And that's why this NDA thing comes up. But I really believe, as an entrepreneur, you should be much more concerned about having no competition, because being the only guy on the block selling something is next to impossible. So having some other people with similar ideas is great validation for what it is you're trying to develop and sell.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, you think about, collaboration being one thing, second thing being, this finding, or making sure that you're not the only competitor, you're the only person in the market, because that tells you you're going to be pretty lonely, and you're funding the 100% of the education. If you had to put together a third thing that you think innovators should be just aware of as they try to get into this innovation game and kind of push into new markets, what would that be?
I think speed is probably your most important feature. And I'm not talking about the speed of the processor if you're selling some sort of electronic type of device. I'm talking about your speed of execution. Small companies have a competitive advantage over larger competitors, and that is they can generally move much faster. And
that is the key point there. It is. Yeah, you're right. The speed thing is one that just cannot be underestimated. And that's where the small companies really have the advantage. And you and I both were working for very large companies, and that's hard to do. So, hey, Bill, I greatly appreciate you taking the time, sharing your experience in the getting out there ahead of the marketplace. And if people want to follow up or track what you're doing, how do they find you?
I am Bill G on Twitter.
Okay, great. So follow him on Twitter. I'll have links in the show notes. When we come back, I've got a brain hack for you, or this week's killer question. I'm Phil McKinney, and this is Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.